podcast. Hell yeah, brother. Overload, brother. Beats by @Smoke M2D6.
Welcome to another episode of the Seattle Overload podcast. I'm joined by Griffin and Ty, and we're going to have a special in the lull of the off-season data, or as you guys would say, data episode.
I say data. Sometimes I say data. I like the long A.
Honestly, I feel like it would have been like you that would have said data, and then we would have said data.
As they say, you say patata, I say potato.
No, we say potato too.
What?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Right. Anyway, this
too many vowels.
So awkward.
Like Z.
You guys are
That's
clearly
a throwback.
You guys are clearly doing absolutely fine.
Yeah, we're great. We're vibing. The vibes are great. The vibes are immaculate. Yeah.
And how are you, Matty?
Well, struggling in the Seahawks off-season, no news, sort of having to rewind the Sound of the Seahawks episode 2 on the official Seahawks YouTube channel, 400 times, play it back in 0.25 speed, pause it, and hope that the blurry wall behind the main shot somehow becomes visible and reveals all of the VMAX deepest and darkest secrets. But other than that, no, absolutely fine.
So the next episode is definitely going to be offense based, right? And Waldron based.
Well, I'm wondering if they're going to keep that on a download because they don't want to expose the quarterback competition. But then they did.
Oh, they can frame it like it's anyone's game, especially because training camp hasn't actually started yet.
Well, and they did end episode 2 with a shot of Tyler Lockett, so they are hinting towards the offense. But right. I wouldn't be shocked if they exclude the quarterbacks.
Yeah. We'll get some Shane Waldron action though. See what he emphasizes and what he doesn't emphasize. Bit
of Dickerson.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Some nice run blocking terms. Talking tracks and Waldron saying about I wonder if he coaches in the way he does press conferences where he says so much and yet so little.
Absolutely nothing.
Do you feel like the NFL could see these videos and then next year they're like, okay, you're doing Hard Knocks?
I don't know. Maybe this is their way of giving fans what they want, but being able to control it, because I don't think Pete wants a third party anywhere near.
I wondered if this was actually the franchise preparing for Hard Knocks next year, and they've been told maybe. It's quite likely. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how the eligibility works off the top of my head, but I'm pretty certain they're in line next year if they don't make the playoffs.
Maybe, yeah. I feel like a lot of them doing this though is trying to rope fans in after trading away Russell Wilson because they're kind of worried.
I agree. That was quite significant. And they have also been advertising their training camp tickets quite a bit. Usually that sells out immediately. Spies, who I send the VMAC to take pictures of certain things. They've been able to get tickets very easily, and there's still tickets available, I think, for a lot of the training camp days. So they clearly are struggling to get fans invested in this team full of superstars like Jamal Adams, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Michael Dixon,
Jason Myers, Tyler Ott,
Travis Homer.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All the
Nick
best
Ballore.
players.
Mm-hmm.
So, football data. This episode, we're going to highlight 5, maybe 6 of our favorite metrics around the Seahawks from the 2021 season, but also extrapolate that to how, that may look in 2022, how that impacts the future of this football team.
Right.
And first up, quarterback wins.
Quarterback wins. And
a valid metric.
Yeah. So the one that I chose was
EPA per play.
Seattle's defensive EPA per pass allowed to wide receivers and tight ends since week 6. And the reason why I am highlighting that why I'm choosing week 6 to be this line of demarcation is because, well, that's when they changed things on defense. That was kind of when they started to shift toward more too high, as the saying goes, and playing really aggressive zone, having really aggressive zone matching principles within their too high stuff. They had done some too high stuff before week 6, but there wasn't as much. They weren't putting as much on the overhangs like Jordan Brooks and Ugo Amadi when they were in that. So that's kind of when they.
To your point as well,
Yeah.
Griff. That's when they changed, like from a schematic perspective, but also personnel wise. Something I was reminded of recently. You know, the cornerback situation. They kind of had that was not ideal, and they had to sort of figure that out, and it sort of started coming together. Then
it's cornerback driven as well. That's for sure. And Matty, you can expand on that. But so without much further ado, that stat was again EPA per pass allowed to non-running backs, right? Wide receivers and tight ends combined. They were
hold on, Griff, real quick. Matty, can we see that huge bottle again? That is a massive, absurdly massive water bottle.
Well, no free ads actually.
Oh, ripped off the label. Off the label. We want the bottle.
It's very important to stay hydrated.
It doesn't even fit in the whole frame.
What is that? 64 ounces?
1.5 liters.
Wow.
I said you do liters?
We actually
you do not.
What's interesting is we actually do liters, but we do like nothing else in the metric system. For whatever reason, though, we do use liters.
Yeah, you can buy like liters of soda bottles at the store.
Talking of metrics.
Okay, so they were 7th in no, sorry. That was an important segue. 7th in EPA per pass, wide receivers and tight ends. In effect, they were a good pass defense downfield. And it's important to highlight because, well, it frames their strengths and weaknesses as a defense because and this will kind of lead into the next stat. I don't want to give it away yet though. But when you're a defense, everyone has mixed feelings about what the defense was last year, but when you're not letting offenses get vertical on you and you're just simply not giving up many completions or even attempts even downfield, it's hard to score a lot of points. It's hard for an offense to score a lot of points when they can't put the ball downfield. And let's remember, they were 10th in defensive points per drive last year. That's for the whole season. They were tied for 10th in the regular season. So, yeah, they had some pretty fatal flaws. But when we're talking about how far this defense needs to come, we still have to lay it all out on the table and actually digest what they actually are before we talk about what they need to improve. Defensive efficiency wise, yeah, their total like DVOA and EPA per play total for all situations was not great. It was like 20 something. But the first thing you're trying to prevent are points, and they actually did okay there. And they were one of the better defenses in defending wide receivers and tight ends. And another way of looking at it is like passes that traveled 10 yards downfield or greater. They were also like, I think 5th in EPA per pass using that metric. And further, they gave up the 5th least explosives total, no matter where the ball was thrown. Just explosive passes. They gave up the 5th fewest. Last time I checked, I believe that might be wrong, but it was around there. And then they were also, since week 6, the single most least targeted defense in the intermediate from yards 10 to 20 or 10 to 19. And that's by total dropbacks. So that just meant, I mean, if you're not targeting over the middle or past 10 yards, below 20 in that intermediate section, things aren't open because any offense would rather throw there than hit the running back or hit the check down or have to hit something more shallow than that. Now, obviously, if they were 7th in that metric that I initially listed, and they were 10th overall in points, and they were like 22nd or something in total EPA per play, that obviously means that on passes to running backs and or passes below 10 yards, they were doing horrifically. And indeed they were. And we've talked ad nauseum on this podcast reasons why for that.
Well, we can also
but-
transition to a different metric for that as well.
Well,
but...
we can. So I guess I'll do 2 in a row because it makes sense. The next metric I was going to highlight was their for the whole season on passes of air yards less than 5, which that's an attempt to kind of combine screens and checkdowns and things of that nature, swing passes. They were 29th for the whole season, which is horrific. So obviously, and the success rate was like 56%, which is like ludicrously high. And that was also worse than the league. So they're just like giving up all these first downs on those passes. And yeah, when you're playing too high, that means, and even if you're playing cover 2, you have 5 underneath defenders. But if you're assigning your corners to play kind of an aggressive carry on a fade ball, because if you think about it, cover 2, you want top down coverage on a fade ball. And if you're wanting them to carry that route, in essence, you kind of sometimes only have 3 defenders or 2 defenders to one side if you're checking it down. And that's just bad spacing to be able to defend that running back or that tight end or that receiver on those checkdowns. They were 29th in the league, but I forgot what I was saying. I just cut myself off. But when you don't have a pass rush and your interior defensive underneath interior is being ran off by the routes, and pass rush is just giving the quarterback all that time, by the time they actually hit the running back, there's more space between that running back and those defenders. So it's essentially, we observe it, and statistically, it appears to be a pass rush issue. But that's kind of a theory. But we can go even further with this, because when you identify when Carlos Dunlap finally started to come alive last season, which is around week 13, week 14, the final 5 games of the season, when the 4-man rush improves, that same figure to that same defensive figure on attempts under 5 yards, they jump from 29th up to 15th in the league. So simply Carlos Dunlap and Darrell Taylor playing at their best that we saw last year cut that problem in half, basically. So we can assume that with Uchenna and Nwosu coming in, hopefully the addition of Boya Mafe, Shelby Harris, which is huge, Quentin Jefferson, who's a decent interior pass rusher, hopefully we see that principle continue to improve so that they can continue to play their base stuff as much as necessary, but be able to defend all 3 levels of the field. So that's going to be one of the main things to look for next year. Can the back 7 maintain their play in defending downfield? If you think about it, they did that without a pass rush too. That they got those figures against receivers, tight ends, targets down 10 yards down the field or greater, without a pass rush. Adding a pass rush, theoretically, that those numbers could improve even more. But also, can that improve the yak problems at the first level, so they can get off the field?
Yep.
The main caveat there is obviously the exit of DJ Reed and the corner situation having potential, but being a question mark still. So it's enough for me.
Well, and to the point of pass rush, ESPN had Seattle's pass rush win rate, which, not a perfect metric, but they had that at 39%, which only placed 20th best in the league. That's basically using player tracking data from NFL Next Gen Stats to see how often a pass rush is able to beat his block within 2.5 seconds. So they weren't getting quick pressure, basically. They weren't getting quick pressure, so people were having to cover for longer without sort of busting the pocket up most of the time. But I think also the stuff Griffin spoke about, along with the tape, which we've seen as well, is, it's just evidence that, they weren't rushing the passer very well. And then I think there's kind of a theory that they're playing kind of soft defense. They weren't covering guys tightly, and hence why they got checked down. It wasn't really that the case. Yeah, they were having to get deeper in their drops because of the fact that they weren't able to rush the passer as well. But, really they were playing matchup zone coverage. They were matching routes tightly down the field. The issue was they couldn't remove the check down. Now,
or the screen. But
Also,
Yeah.
to your point, you mentioned your metric about wide receivers and tight ends and how running backs carve them up. One thing I would say is part of it was a lack of pass rush, but part of it also is that in the coverages that they're running, the running back is in a clear one-on-one, often on the backside of the coverage with a linebacker in a situation where if the offense comes up with the right concept, the running back is out leveraging that guy. And we saw a great example of that versus the New Orleans Saints, where Alvin Kamara went off in the first half
Right.
against Jordan Brooks, and then even more chiefly against Ryan Neal in dime, beating one-on-ones, and Seattle adjusted in the second half with different coverage. So if that happens, then that won't have helped the EPA per play. But if that happens, Seattle can adjust. But overall, I think your point about the pass rush is really the issue there, and it's very encouraging how their EPA per play per pass, versus the wide receivers and tight ends is so good. But it's not just a pass rush thing; it is also the coverages they're running. They're not soft, but they do leave a mismatch, which only a few teams can attack. Because how many running backs are better than a Jordan Brooks, better than maybe a Jamal Adams, even Ryan Neal, you fancy against most running backs in the league. Like Alvin Kamara really is one of a kind. I'm not sure if you think about the NFC West, like how many running backs are passing game mismatch.
And like it's check down. It's also screens. But if you think about the design of what screens are doing, when you talked about like aggressive match zone, a lot of screens work because they're trying to run the coverage off. They're trying to get you as far away as the running back as possible, make you think it's some nasty play action concept where you got to roll over, find the
vertical releases. Yeah.
Right. And so get the linebackers as far away as possible from that running back. Then by the time you hit the running back, it's one guy on a one-on-one with 300-pound offensive linemen. And that ball is just going to go for, 10 plus yards every time in those contexts. We did see them improve a lot versus screens against the Cardinals. But again, that kind of goes back to they had pass rush that game. When you have a formidable four-man rush, the running back, I mean, you can influence the protection is what I'm saying, so that the defense can play 7-on-4 instead of 7-on-5. If the running back or tight end has to block or block for longer, like a check release, then that just gives you a numbers advantage. One way to defend the running back is make him block, right?
Yeah. And to that point as well, or you can do as they did down the line against like the Packers really well. You can run sim pressures where you're guaranteeing that your fourth rusher is rushing the back. Therefore, your eyes of the fourth rusher are right on the back. So if it is a screen, he's rushing right into the screen.
Right.
Like he's right there.
Yeah. So that will be a big thing if we can see. I mean, the offenses did not respect their four-man rush last year because one, it just wasn't good, but it really hammers home how poor it was at times when they're running like four out of empty or like big dagger country, like cross country dagger out of 3x2 empty formations.
Yeah, the 5-step drop.
Yeah, deep 5-step, 7-step drops.
Done empty, like BA.
It's just like this. A defense can't expect to hold up like that, or the coverage can't, unless you've got, amazing man corners, which very few teams do. And if they do have very amazing man corners, they can't hold on to them for very long, as the 2019 Patriots showed.
So let's talk about the corners.
Yeah.
So as I alluded to, Seattle's cornerback situation after week 6 kind of really started looking good, because week 6, if you recall, was the Steelers game, right? And Trey Brown, they approached that like it was an open competition with Sidney Jones, right? They sort of switched time while DJ Reed anchored on the right side. The week before against the Rams in week 5, that was just Sidney Jones. But then in week 4, they were kind of messing around with the corners still, and they're sort of still trying to figure things out, chemistry out, all of that sort of stuff. So it really does matter that they they actually had their cornerback group kind of starting to be established. Now, the other thing I'd ask you, Griffin, is this year DJ Reed has gone. So it's all well and good saying their EPA on passing plays, versus wide receivers and tight ends was really good last year. But without DJ Reed, with Sidney Jones, but Trey Brown's hurt. He's coming off a really bad knee injury. We assume Sidney Jones will be the starting left corner. He's kind of the only certainty in the cornerback group, you'd hope. But then is he a certainty? Because he was available for a reason. He has an injury record. It's looking patchy, the cornerback group, whatever way you want to spin it, whatever way they've tried to upgrade it with the draft, right? So all these coverages where, especially like the quarter half deal, where you're one-on-one on the backside of that, kind of. I mean, you need to press up. You can play it like press man. If it's like on the backside of trips. If there's two to your side, then you're going to have a hard quarter safety helping you in the dig window, but you're still having to play with like press man kind of traits. Can they hang at corner? Like,
right?
Are you confident?
I want to say yes. There's a path where they are good. I mean, there's a reality where they are just fine. Does Artie Burns have a repeat performance of last year? Because he's had an up and down career, but he was solid last year. Can the Sidney Jones we saw the last month and a half of last season, can they get that for a full season? Or if one of them doesn't, can Trey Brown, is he healthy? Does he return to what he showed for about a month in his rookie year where he looked really promising? So it's just a big question mark. I mean, there's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of variance baked into it. So, but like you said, they can mitigate a little bit if they're playing a bunch of half quarter to the half side. Well, the corner that is playing the cloud doesn't have a lot on them, right?
Right.
To the quarter side, you just simply have that safety play more of kind of like a cone almost, and help a little bit more with an isolated receiver anyway. If it's the backside of trips, it's 2x2 where things start to get interesting. That's where you really got to play actual cornerback to that quarter side, right? And then also, do we see more just pure quarters? Because that's something we didn't see last year very much. And Sean Desai didn't play a lot of pure quarters either, like pure cover 4 to both sides of the field in Chicago last year. And that seemed to follow from the injuries that he had, because he didn't want to put them in those situations.
He spoke about how I forget when he did it, but I've heard him talk about how it was very important when he was a DC. Like, he figured out, like, once he was in that position, only doing things is obvious, and lots of people say it, but only doing things that his guys could do. Like, he spoke about how he found it, a good challenge having to adapt to what he had. So, proof of your point,
right.
Griff.
Right. But then to contrast, Carl Scott, obviously Alabama, Minnesota, they play a lot of quarters. Right. So and he probably looks at Sidney and Artie and says, yeah, you guys have the skill set to play, you press the line of scrimmage, you can do all that, carry things downfield. You do wonder, I imagine Carl Scott looks at Trey Brown. Let's assume he's the Trey Brown that we know him to be, or at least that he was before injury. Probably thinks, I like your technique, I like how you play and everything. But he probably does have a little pause with his length. And so does Pete Carroll probably. And then he wonders, do I need to cloud Trey more often than not, especially against bigger body receivers?
Well, the sort of kind of matchup choices you're speaking about, though, kind of re-emphasizes to me that, what Kyle Scott and Sean Desai will bring, but for me, actually more Kyle Scott, or, at least on paper, is these kind of coverage tools, and more like coverage checks,
right,
and more kind of on-field freedom with, game plan influenced.
Right.
On-field freedom for the DBs, if they're playing in like a split safety deal, to kind of get into different things based off what they're getting, receiver split, receiver matchup, and also just the fact that, and this kind of brings, brings us to one of the metrics I wanted to highlight, which is, and I've mentioned it on here before, but Sports Info Solutions charted Seattle as running the 4th highest percentage of cover 2, cover 4, and cover 6, so middle field open zone coverage in the NFL versus drop back passing game. And True Media had the Seahawks as the 5th highest percentage. So Seattle was doing a lot of this already, but with Desai hurt coming in, I think they have the schematic background to kind of build upon that, tweak it up a bit in certain situations, make it more extensive, more versatile, not just one check for each thing, maybe 2 checks, right? Don't need to overcomplicate it. And maybe those 2 checks the next week are the plan B check, or the slightly different check is different because of the different opponent and what they face. Right. They just have a bit more in their arsenal. Not that Seattle couldn't have done that in the past. It just wasn't their emphasis. And they were sort of finding their base still.
Right.
Just like how in 2021, when they run in the bear front, they built upon 2020, and the bear front in 2021, they tried to go more 3-4 with it. They went left and right. They didn't have an obvious Sam or obvious Leo. They tried to get rid of their field and boundary tells, and how that worked with the coverage.
Right.
So,
and another thing to layer on top of what you just said, one thing Carl Scott, or maybe it was Jamal, but he said the emphasis in those mini camp press conferences for the safeties was making them interchangeable. Mm-hmm. If they're interchangeable to left, right, but when it comes to wanting to protect the corners, if you can make the safeties truly interchangeable, you can make your kind of your split safety coverage like ambidextrous in a way. If you feel like you want to flop it and have the one side that you normally play cloud, the other side play the quarter. If you feel like there's a corner receiver mismatch that the offense can manipulate to their favor, then you can just, if you truly have Jamal and Ugo, or Jamal and Quandre structured and designed to where they can flip the call if they need to, then you can cloud the side that you'd rather have clouded and still play quarters the other side. And the rest of the defense can, like the schematic domino effect can follow. Last year, it seems like if that happened, they just reverted to playing cover 2 in those situations, because they did play so much cover 2. If they would have rather played half quarter, but they found themselves in a situation where, they wanted to protect one corner, or they played a lot of
both corners
for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, right. But then they would just cloud both sides.
Yeah.
This would give an organization to the defense that would kind of allow them to get into what they really want at all times with that. So that's another thing to look for, I guess, with the safeties being interchangeable.
And I mean, basically in what are we talking about here? Well, last year they only did it where the half was to the field.
Right.
Well, it mainly just so happened it was the field, but it was to the passing strength, right?
Right.
And then the quarter side was to the weak side, but to Jamal Adams in the boundary. And Jamal Adams played in the boundary. Quandre Diggs played to the field. Ugo Amadi played to the field in his vertical hook, matching the 2 vertical. And they had a squat corner to the field, and then they had the quarters on the backside, right? So.
Right.
This year, if it's like the same thing, you mentioned the interchangeability. If it's like the same thing as what they did with Bear, when they then went left and right in 2021, maybe I liked how that fit their personnel last year. However, if they kind of change it up occasionally this year, which it sounds like they're going to do, and they don't have the both of them do both, that is big. As you've basically said, I've just repeated what you said in a slightly different way. So, I guess, we mentioned pass rush, right? Last year, another metric that you wanted to talk about, Griffin, their blitz rate was 22.4%, which placed
He's counting.
32 minus 11 equals
4. You look so appalled.
After we count to 10, we're gonna name our vowels, Matty.
22.
Nope.
They placed 22nd. So they placed 22nd in their blitz rate.
So that was minus 10.
Yeah, well, we're under pressure here.
Jesus. So they were. Yeah, go on.
So their blitz rate was 22nd in the league at 22.4%. So Griffin, why weren't they more aggressive?
Why weren't they more aggressive?
Are they a soft defense? Were they a soft defense last
year?
Yeah,
so obviously, kind of like to unpack that question, that implies that an aggressive defense is marked by whether they blitz or not, right? That's just in part a straw man, because not everybody characterizes a defensive aggressiveness that way. It can be, man coverage, or how aggressively you match routes within zone, or you can even look at it like, if you have problem areas that are problem areas, do you devote schematic attention to that? And that could be anything, right? Does that mean aggressive? Like, right? That could mean, the word can mean anything and everything you want it to mean, right? But yeah, so Seattle rushed 5 or more guys, whatever you said, 22.4%, which came in at 21st. If you look at the list of percentages, that's kind of, most teams are clustered between like 20 and 30%. So, like average, if they blitz 3% more, they'd be dead average, right? So, but to put that number into context, Seattle normally, like the last 4 or 5 years, have kind of hovered between 22 and 26, 28%. So that's kind of right in their ballpark. And they weren't lacking this year because they weren't blitzing enough. They weren't being like, trying to get after the quarterback as much. Now, when you don't have a good 4-man rush, yeah, there's merit in rushing a lot, but that can be dangerous, because we have to remember the first half of 2020, they were like top 5 in blitz rate. They were one of the most aggressive teams in the league, and they generated a lot of sacks, and they also gave up a lot of explosive passes downfield because their corners couldn't handle it. Because when the blitz was blocked up by the offense, the corners couldn't hold up. It wasn't until DJ Reed came in that they were able to hold up more when they did blitz, and they still decreased the blitz rate in the second half of 2020, but because they were just trying to play more sound, collective drop 7 defense. But the point is, though, is that being more aggressive isn't a panacea up front, because it's a delicate balance, all easier said than done. But that said, Seattle was a very effective team when they did rush 5 this year. And not all blitzing is the same, obviously. Like, you can blitz out of your base zone for a different reason than you would blitz when it's 3rd and 7 and you're showing cover 1 and you've got 7 guys up on the line of scrimmage and you don't know who's blitzing and who isn't, right? Like 2 different worlds. But Seattle's blitzing,
and sorry, we should say you can't. It's harder to do that on base downs, because if you've got lots of people up front, then people get knocked out of gaps. You get weird blocking angles, like,
or you
it's
get
unsound with stopping the run.
It's unsound. It can be unsound for that, and it can also be unsound trying to get into your pass drop if you're playing zone. Now, the principle in Seattle when they did the Seahawks, when they did rush 5 or more in their early down stuff, was to kind of supplement the lack of inherent, like, attacking the offense that is not there when you're dropping 7. Like, when you're dropping 7, you're playing a bare front, which isn't great spacing for a 4-man rush. You're dropping 7 into coverage. Their principle there is if they drop back, you're just trying to choke out the passing concept and make the quarterback make either a bad decision downfield or check it down, and then you rally and tackle the ball.
Mhm.
That's when you're playing too high coverage, which is all the rage right now. The primary thing you're trying to do is stop an explosive pass, and like that's the number one priority. When you present two high safeties, two is better than one, right? Well, Pete Carroll's philosophy historically, or at least in Seattle, being cover three, but still the main concept is don't let them go deep. Well, he's really saying we can get it done with one safety, and we trust our corners to defend the fade ball no matter what, right? But we associate being, conservative and stopping the deep ball with Pete Carroll's cover three, but too high is even further in that direction. You're saying prevent it by default almost. Now teams still get explosive against too high coverages. It can happen, of course, but like that's the whole point. You're devoting more resources to stopping that. So to win back some,
real quick.
yeah.
Too high, base, like vanilla as hell cover two. If you get 4 verts, you should have 5 guys, 5 defenders basically deep, right? If you're running cover 3, you get 4 verts, you'll have like 4 defenders deep. So
yeah, right. Yeah, true. With all the matching for each respective coverage, of course. Right. But so point being though is like no one's calling Brandon Staley's defense soft, right? No one's calling Vic Fangio's defense soft, but their number one goal is you're not going to go deep on us. That's what they're saying when they choose to spend that much time in too high. But so when Seattle's living in that same world this past year with minor differences, if you don't have a 4-man rush out of Bear, if you just don't have the talent, go ahead.
I think my take on that is the problem. Like, one, we haven't seen the NFL in general actually come up with I think this year we're going to see so many intermediate like beaters, right?
Right.
Like big digs, backside dig, bang, like beating these 2-eye kind of deals. But also, I think the way that they match the obviously the deep, right? But the way they choke out the cover checkdowns tightly, like I think that is inherently like it feels more aggressive than like when you see cover 3 and it's like they check it down and we rally to it. You see what I'm saying? Like that is softer looking.
Right, but I mean, it looks soft and
whereas cover 3 is obviously covering up that intermediate,
Right, and it all depends on how you match stuff.
Of
like
course,
what ultimately defines the potential of a coverage is what the underneath defenders are doing, right?
Of course.
But like anyway, so sound coverage and what Seattle is doing in their base stuff last year prevents positive plays from happening for the offense, but you want to also generate negative plays for the offense. That's forcing incompletions. That's not just forcing incompletions, but obviously turnovers, getting tackles in the backfield, sacks, tackling the check down in the backfield if you can at the line of scrimmage, 2-yard gains, etc. Seattle gains back some of that lost aggression inherent to the scheme, but then further also inherent to what they don't have up front by sending the slot every so often and then spinning to cover 3 or sending 2 guys weak and then dropping other guys, right? Well, like a classic like NCAA blitz, they call it one of the classic fire zone blitzes and stuff. Anyway, so they did that at a short clip, and it's fair to wonder why not do it more if they got such great results out of it. And by great results, I mean when they rushed 5 or more compared to other defenses in the league, they were, I think, 7th in opponent yards per cover snap. So wildly successful. Yeah, why not do more of it? But we're not talking about that, and I suspect they will do more of it this year, but we're not talking about them approaching 30+%. Like they're not going to be Rex Ryan. That's not what they're trying to do. If the the more you dip into your auxiliary and supplemental stuff from your base stuff, the more you cease to be your base defense. And their base defense, not just in base personnel, but it needs to be rooted in you're not giving up passes downfield. That's what the whole defense is trying to be. And again, the easier it is to defend all three levels with a better 4-man rush, but the fire zones and stuff in their earlier down calls will allow them to generate more negative plays. So
what I'd also where I'd like to take this actually also is kind of the nickel position in 2022. So like, it's funny me saying this because I've actually, in a past episode, I think Justin Coleman might actually struggle to make the roster. But if Coleman proves me wrong and is right and is that kind of man nickel, that really matters to me, because in bear, like the bear spacing, the easiest way to send pressure from that is those 5 guys at the line of scrimmage, and then to run cover 1 behind it, right? If you're going to run a fire zone, so 3 deep, 3 under, it's so obvious to a quarterback they're drained out here. Like, it's going to be these 3 off-ball guys, 5 will come at me. Like, I know where to go with this football. I know where my beater is. But if you're running cover 1, it's tighter coverage. You can peel either of the ends, and you can still have a wrap playing.
Right.
You're keeping the back in. You're not, most of the time. No, it's easier to send the pressure out of cover 1 with that spacing and that 5-3 kind of presentation. So Seattle didn't really have the nickel, as we spoke about, in Ugo Armadi to play kind of man coverage on the slot. But if Coleman can do that, then that kind of unlocks more options for them on early down pressure wise, more viable options. The option was always there, and they did still do it, but like Coleman could be a different level of that.
The other thing is
doing it.
We've talked about Ugo and what he's good at. We've talked about Justin Coleman and what he's good at. One being zone, one being man for Coleman, zone for Ugo. The problem, though, is as far as the disguise goes, as far as disguising goes, like what you're just talking about, Coleman's out there. You don't want that to be a coverage tell, right? You don't want that to be like a man package world. So if he can be good at zone, just good enough, then that's when you can blitz and then play cover 1 behind it, right? That's where you can get into that world, right? Especially with bare spacing, like you said, because you've got 2 guys standing up. You can do different things to manage the running back with that, right? And then, but with Ugo, it's like when he's out there, they know they're playing zone. So if they do send pressure, they're likely playing zone principles behind it. Maybe occasionally man. You know what I mean? So like that's where it's challenging. That's where like a nickel in the modern league that can do all of it is so valuable, because that's how you stitch calls together, down to down, snap to snap, and keep the offense guessing. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, Coleman has a big thing working against him in that, can he be like a legit classic overhang? Can you be like the star, as that position is called in a 2-high world? And is it worth mixing Ugo in there without his flexibility to play man coverage well? So I don't know how they handle that, but they've got options though.
So where are we at now? Because I know you guys have at least one offensive metric that we want to get into. Do we have anything else that we have?
I don't think so. We can wrap defense up there.
Yep. Good old defense. That was
all
interesting.
Right. We'll cap it off with something offense, something fun, something.
So
this is what gets the views, folks. Offense, points, fantasy football.
All right, so
you pro Geno man.
You want something to look forward to? Here's something to look forward to statistically with Geno Smith. In the 3 games that Geno Smith started, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett over that window. So we're comparing them to other receivers from weeks 6 to 8, those 3 games. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were 5th and 11th, respectively, in yards per route ran during Geno Smith's 3-game starting stint, which is to say they were getting elite efficiency when Geno Smith was throwing to them. So if their efficiency can remain stable from going from a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback to a guy that is currently known as a backup, if that can remain stable for a full season, that probably bodes well for Seattle's, in my opinion, their floor from dropping too far. Whatever that floor is, I don't determine their floor to be exactly what Geno did in his 3.5 games, translating that. I think the floor is the projection as well as the ceiling is. But if you can just extract that, him being efficient throwing to DK and Tyler, then that's a good thing moving forward, you would think, right? So obviously when you're viewing it through the lens of per route ran, that doesn't always mean that they're getting the ball when they should. That doesn't mean that he's not forcing it to them when there's somebody else open maybe. But their efficiency not tanking is a good sign as far as Seattle being able to put points up. Not a lot of points, but I don't see them being. I mean, when you have two 1,000-yard caliber receivers and they can get 1,000 yards and get it efficiently, theoretically, you're not going to be a basement dweller offense. You're going to be able to move the ball, at least have moments, right? Good games, bad games, sure. Good drives, bad drives, but the good drives will be there. The good games will be there. So that's my little statistical snapshot.
Well, and the chemistry that Geno Smith has with DK Metcalf is going to give him, I think, the upper hand. There's going to be an interesting discussion in the preseason of how much do the actual starters play to try and give the quarterbacks a fair competition, with this, because you don't want them to get hurt, but then also you want to see what they'd look like in the first string offense.
Yeah.
So, And Geno was working out with DK this week, I think. So there you go. They've got something going on there. But then down the depth chart, Drew Lock's working out with Cody Thompson. They're friends, it seems like. They did something in Dallas together, I think. So
yeah,
Cody Thompson may play more in the preseason. So interesting. But I always think back to that Geno Smith unlocking DK Metcalf intermediate back shoulder fade, where if DK can become that kind of guy where it's 15 yards one-on-one back shoulder bang,
right?
Okay.
And Geno was very accurate to both of these guys downfield too. They didn't always connect, but I think every throw was in the realm of catchable. This is another stat for you. Geno Smith on air attempts over 16 yards and greater. He had I think he led the league in catchable rate according to Sports Info Solutions. Now, catchable is very subjective, and I'm not saying he's the most accurate quarterback in the league downfield. I'm not taking that stat at face value. However, it does indicate that he was actually accurate downfield.
His deep ball catchable pass rate was 57.1%,
which is high.
Mm-hmm. But interestingly, his catchable pass rate was 68.4%, which only came in 42nd. But the fact that his deep balls were relatively high for a deep ball is
he's not afraid to go downfield either, and that's they have the.
He'll take his shots. He's not that veteran who understands defense but won't push it downfield. The classic comes into the game and then is just really good at taking that check down.
Right. No,
and then what happens is the defense just clamps the check down out and then it's the end.
Right. He's not afraid to push the ball, and we've got more to say about how he is in the drop back game, which this preseason will be really revealing because he'll be working with the ones against defenses ones. So at least most of them. Also another one, his completion percentage over expectation during his stint was actually second in the league. He completed more than 6. Now I have issues with that stat, but it's interesting. It's how you wield it.
I don't have issues with the stat. I just think, like any stat, we have to understand what it's actually telling us, right?
Right.
It's really good in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it combines, depending on who's doing it, but it combines the expected completion of, I mean, what website or charting company?
Right.
But it combines like expected completion of depth and then also proximity to defenders and stuff. Which, cool. Second in the league, so he completed 6.5% more of his passes. 6.5% more of his passes than expected, which ranks second in the league, second behind Joe Burrow, who isn't known to be the greatest arm talent. But just below Smith was Rodgers and Kyler Murray. So like there are guys with talented arms right in there with him. So we're not proclaiming him the second most accurate quarterback and the best deep ball throw in the league. We are simply saying that he actually has arm talent. So I don't know.
Something to cling to.
Yeah, there you go. And I've got more, but we'll save it for another time.
Yeah, when Gino wins the job, we'll just fully launch into that. But you also had highlighted, Griff, EPA per play on passes lower than 5 air yards. The splits from weeks 1 to 13.
We talked about that.
What, just now?
No, we talked about that in the beginning. We're going in circles. We said that after the.
Oh yeah, that's the defense
great
thing.
reveal of.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, don't be sorry. Don't give me an excuse to bring it up again, because I will.
I was like, why have you highlighted this? Like, who cares about little check downs from like anyway. Well then. The Seahawks will return to training camp later this month. Then we will have a bit more to talk about in that sense. I think we're going to do a mailbag, as you guys call it. I'd call it a post box. Do you have post boxes?
You guys call mailboxes post boxes, really?
Yeah.
Well,
and they're lovely in red.
Post office, so I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of works, doesn't it? Nice and logical. We'll do one of those where you can send in your questions about the Seahawks or, anything, but, preferably the Seahawks, because as you can tell, when we talk about ourselves and delve away from Seattle, it's really not interesting at all.
That's right.
And
all right.
Have you got anything else? Anyone here? Ty, Griffin?
I have one last metric for you.
Oh.
Lay it on us.
Football.
I have seen the light, folks.
Oh, the Mariners won.
Geno Smith is QB1, but also, yes, the Mariners won, and the Mariners have won 11 in a row. That is also a great metric, but Geno Smith is QB1. That's the best metric here.
That's right. That's right.
Great. Griffin?
Very good.
All right. Well, thank any work coming up. Everyone check out Ty is the editor at
InsideTheMariners.com. If you like the Mariners, come check it out. Also check out the Locked On Mariners podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
He will take you inside the Mariners. Griffin.
All the way inside.
If you're watching this, you know where to find me.
Yeah.
It's also displayed prominently there on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. And I'm a free agent, so please,
we can find you in
give me the bag.